just this specific verse. And I
Right,
was
right,
like,
right.
no, it's First Corinthians 14, read that. Uh, no, because if you actually read the First Corinthians, all of it, that's not what it means. That's basically it. Even as
Mm.
somebody who wouldn't say that egalitarian is the position on, who disagree with that position, I wouldn't say that this is a good proof text for our position. You
Mm.
know, because you have to take it as what it is. If we take this literally, then there's got to be no female Sunday school
Teacher.
teachers. There's got to be no female professors because a seminary or Bible school is still part of the church.
So, hello guys. This is the fourth episode of Think With Me segment of the Christian Think Tank PH podcast. I hope that you have been journeying with us for I think 1 month and a half
Yeah.
already,
Yeah.
right?
Around a month already. Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
So as you see, guys, we have this opportunity to have this face to face because for some of you maybe the three of us, the admins of the Christian Think Tank PH, is staying here in Davao. So
You revealed to them where we are located.
Yes,
Now we
so
can
you
be
know
targeted.
yeah, you know where to find us, huh?
The
If we-
durian city of the south.
Yeah. Malapit na yung season, bro, no? So,
Yeah, durians.
Durian na naman. So, yeah, here with me is Zoriel and Res. So, before we continue and say a lot of things and maybe mess up in the future, just kidding. I'd like to, of course, bro, diba? Ladies first. So, let's ask
Oh my
Res to
goodness.
introduce herself first.
Well, I'm Res and I help people improve in their communication in English. Tingnan mo tuloy na pressure na ako. I hope I shouldn't have said that. But anyway, I'm just known to be Res.
Yeah, I'm Zuriel. I work here. We are currently at
Yes.
SPBTS, Southern Philippines Baptist Theological Seminary, by the way. So I work here as the assistant academic dean. But I don't really do anything. I don't really do anything now. But yeah, I teach some subjects on theology and biblical studies, and yeah, so I'm also one of the admins and pioneer of Christian Think Tank PH.
Guys, hindi nila nasabi, may common sa kanilang dalawa.
Ano yon? I'm scared. What's that,
Alam
Don?
nila siguro. They are both single, guys.
Oh my goodness. Come on. That's not
Hanggang
part of
doon
the
na lang, okay?
script.
Hanggang doon
Oh
na
my
lang.
gosh.
Okay, so guys, at least, ngayon lang din tayo nagkasama ulit, di ba? So, I mean, we meet once a week. At least. But face to face, kahit nasa Davao kasi mga...
Yeah, that's the thing,
you know.
diba? No, we're like literally, probably 7 kilometers or probably on rest part, like 4 kilometers apart. Doon, malayo-layo konti. Nasa downtown area kasi siya. But, we we probably meet only twice a year at max. I mean, at maximum.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. But, I'm still grateful for you guys coming over. They came down here to the south para we can shoot this Think With Me episode tonight.
Yeah.
Tonight, yeah.
So guys, how is life going for you guys? Let's start with
is
Dress
this,
again.
is this
you know?
really part of the
Yeah,
Think With
just-
Me? Oh my goodness.
At least they will know, something about you
I'm
because
still
it's your
alive and
first
kicking.
time.
I'm still alive and kicking, so I would say so far so good. Let's say 70% good, 30% not so good.
Okay. We know the details.
Let's not speak about the details. Yeah, my
about you,
part,
bro?
yeah, it's of course God has always been so good in our lives. There's been a lot of sufferings. It's not, it's probably not going away anytime sooner. But yeah, I could still see God's goodness in my life, and a lot has been going on lately, but I am still persevering, and through the challenges, because I have my guys here. These guys are probably going through something even harder. So I don't have the karapatan to what you call this magreklamo. You know, for y'all guys, just the context. Kyle's not here, but we're still speaking English. That's because we want. I mean, we're more comfortable speaking English than and
Yes.
Tagalog English than English. I mean, than Tagalog
Yeah.
purely Tagalog. Yes.
And of course, because we consider our audiences, right? Some of them are actually from different countries. Literally, yeah. From our Facebook posts, if you check the, what do you call that, bro?
The
Algorithm, is that it?
dashboard, insights, yeah.
The statistics.
The statistics, yeah. So that's why we're trying hard. Just kidding. So yeah, actually, from if you have been journeying with us, with the Think With Me, you've heard me also shared some stuff I'm going through with life, and I think that's just what life is, right? And I like. I mean, you guys would agree that when you study the word, eventually, it's just when you look at the Bible, life is inseparable, right? You can always see your life through what the Bible says, right? I mean, not in all things that the Bible says, but
It's relatable.
yes, yes. So that's what makes this segment also of Think With Me very exciting, because it's the Bible. When you talk about the Bible, you basically talk about life too, right? So yeah, this segment, Think With Me, is a podcast of the Christian Think Tank PH, and this focuses on exploration of the text, the Bible. We look into the passages and we explore scholarship in order to understand what the Bible intends to teach and what the Bible intends to communicate. So we already had 3 episodes done. First was with Kyle. First, second, third was with Kyle, and the first episode we gave an introduction to biblical interpretation, and it's there where we shared the model that we are using. Right. So Kyle loves to illustrate the model like an onion. Right. Diba? So
Feeling it.
Layer
yes,
by layer.
and then after you peel all those it's where you, after that job, that hard work, it's where you will find what the passage is intending to communicate.
You know
You
what,
want to
Don?
say something?
Even up to now, you know, I only teach NT1 because I'm, you know, truth be told, even if I have, you know, been a Christian for, you know, probably 23 or 25 years, I haven't had that much time spent on reading the Bible, even studying the Bible. No, so that's why I only teach introductory courses, you know, Bible introduction, stuff like that. And even up to now, I still practice doing, you know, being faithful to the you know, biblical interpretation. You know,
The
I still,
principles.
or biblical principles on how to interpret the text, you know,
Right.
the context and stuff like that. You know, there are times that I could still, you know, I mean, I catch myself, you know, trying to make I mean, make the text sound as, you know, as if the way I wanted it to sound, you know. So there are times like that. So even up to now, I'm still trying to improve myself on this stuff.
Yes.
Bro.
Yeah, I think that's a very real. I mean, many Christians can relate. You know, there's always a temptation to just take the Bible and then, as you read it, take it out from its context and then interpret it the way you want to understand it. Especially probably at times when, because we're humans and we're emotional. Yeah, we just take the Bible and we find some comfort.
And we're like a large number of us, like, we're not taught on how to properly read the Bible.
Yes.
So we treat it as if like it's a modern book. And later on, like as we journey further deeper in our faith, we realize that how risky it was to
Yep.
keep on reading the Bible using the modern lens.
Yes. So I like that you pointed out that, rest, because doing this podcast, remembering the seminary training, what I realize is that this Think With Me, you know, this Think With Me, the principles that we are using here, you know, the principles that we shared, this is not only for pastors.
Oh.
This is supposed to be not only for pastors, for preachers or for teachers. This is supposed to be for Christians. Because remember, guys, in the last episode, the final words that we said, Kyle and I, we had the same ideas in our minds, and we said, stop reading the Bible, stop studying the Bible.
Huh? Stop,
Stop reading the Bible,
and
start
studying.
studying the Bible.
Start studying the word.
Yes,
Yeah.
because I know a lot of us, of course, we're Christians. We're taught to have our daily devotions. Yeah,
Memory verse.
yeah, memory verse. No matter how you do it, maybe you have your own. We have our ways of doing it. Problem is sometimes we just read the word, the Bible, but we don't actually study. So we rush on finishing, a 1 year plan of finishing reading the Bible, but we miss to actually learn or know what the Bible is trying to communicate with us because we just read it. We have
Yeah.
not studied it.
Yeah, like it's really different if after reading the chapter or the verse and then you really try to see how God will encounter you in your daily circumstances. It really becomes more alive. The word really becomes alive because you
Yes.
yourself have experienced it.
Yes. So that is exactly what Think With Me is. The reason why we're doing this podcast is because we want to help you. We want to equip you. We want to journey with you in diving deeper into the Word of God. So I'll just do a recap of the model that we're using, the onion.
Yeah.
So
So we're gonna show it here in the screen, no?
Yes,
Or not?
right.
You can see
Yeah.
that in the screen now.
yes, okay, there. So the outer layer is the historical context. Okay? So it is the context wherein we ask the questions, what was the historical and cultural setting of the author and the audience? Kumbaga, anong nangyayari sa mga panahon na yan? Saan si author? Anong nangyayari sa buhay niya? Anong nangyayari doon sa lugar? Anong nangyayari sa buhay ng mga audience kung saan niya pinadala yung sulat niya? O sa panahon na nagsusulat siya mismo.
Yeah.
So that's where you look at this, and it's not just personal, because if you look at the Bible, you have the Israelites, and there are nations, there are people related, and you have to study those people also, right? The
Yeah.
culture, what was happening, in order to understand why the authors say the words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you're trying to actually to study biblical, to go into biblical studies, I remember that probably few years back, 3-4 years ago, I always ask my friends or even my pastors, why does it always this author, palagi siya nagme-mention ng ancient Near Eastern, ancient Near Eastern, ancient Near Eastern. Why does it have to always be ancient Near Eastern? A lot, almost, if you read siguro mga commentaries or even notes sa inyong mga study Bibles,
Bible, yes.
meron mga ancient Near Eastern sa mga ilalim. What does ancient Near Eastern mean?
Right.
Most especially on the Old Testament, books. So that's why that's the historical context. Well, no, back in the
Yes.
history, it's an ancient, history, ancient times of a Near Eastern man. So when you start, you start doing this, the first peel of the onion is specifying, for example, in the Old Testament days, what does an ancient Near Eastern man mean when he says these type of stuff
Yes.
in the Bible?
Right. Concepts, words.
And just to add, like that's where I appreciate the study Bible, where their focus is the commentary on ancient Near East. Yeah, I'm pitching it, but I really appreciated that.
Yes. I actually use that book also because at the back of that book it says context changes everything. Is it?
Yeah, we were talking about the biblical backgrounds.
Yes. Yeah, so that's the historical context. And that is the first layer of the onion that you peel out first. The next is the ultimate context. The ultimate context is where you ask the question, what is the ultimate context of the Bible and the purpose for which it was compiled as many books in one library. So,
That's really a good topic. But why don't we take a quick break first?
Yeah.
Okay.
You guys, you're watching right now. We're talking about a lot of books. You're talking about a lot of Bibles, the historical backgrounds Bible. Those books are available in our discussion hub.
Yeah.
Right.
So some of you might not be in our discussion hub right now. So for you guys to know what we're talking about, check this out.
Right. Okay. Okay. So the second layer of the onion that we're peeling out in order to understand what the text is trying to communicate is the ultimate context. This is where we ask the question, what is the ultimate context of the Bible? And the purpose for which it was compiled as many books in one library.
Yeah.
I like how the Bible Project described the Bible. They say the Bible is a unified story that leads to Jesus. So when you look at in the ultimate context, when you look at a specific book, you ask, why was it included in the canon, right?
Yeah.
Why is it included in the books of the Bible? And so you ask, how does this book lead to Jesus? And so you look at themes that relates, that directs to Jesus. So that's the ultimate context. If you try to use, of course there are a lot of descriptions with the Bible, but we just want to use how the Bible Project described the Bible. Now the next layer that we look into is the broad context.
Okay.
Yes.
What's that?
So this is where you ask, what is the context of the book the passage is written in? This is where you also ask,
the book.
why was it written, and what was the language, the genre. So dito papasok yung mga poetic ba siya, prophetic ba siya.
Also letter.
Yes.
Oh,
Is it
I
a letter?
see.
Is it a pastoral letter? So dun mo yun sila titingnan. And also it includes the language.
Yeah.
Aramaic, Hebrew, Greek.
Oh,
Yes.
I see.
Yes. So after the broad context is the local context. This is where you ask the question, what is the context of the chapter where the passage is located in? And what is being addressed in the chapter? What is the train of thought, and where does it fit with the verses before and after? So when you look at a specific text, this is where we look at the chapter where the passage belongs. And so you read the whole chapter, which we will not do the whole chapter because the specific text that we will be looking is kind of long. But if you look at the Bible, there are paragraphs wherein you can see the immediate context or the local context of the text. So yan yung local context. The next is the textual context. This is where you do the textual study. So you look into the word. If it's in Greek, you look into the Greek word, and what it means. And if it's Hebrew, you look into Hebrew and its translation and how it's used during their time. So later on, anyway, for the past episode, we have been looking into New Testament, na passages, but later on we will be looking at Old Testament text also, and it will also be as exciting as the New Testament or the Greek.
Wow, that's nice. This is actually a very good illustration. I even asked Kyle for this specific picture so that I could use it in my class. It's really helpful to make the laymen or even those who are trying to study the Bible, understand how they could actually exegete. Exegete meaning to
What's that word, bro?
exegete are trying. The way I define exegete is just like the way you actually extract, really extract the real message of the scripture or whatever you're reading at. So sometimes, kasi when you're reading like a verse, you no matter how hard you try by just reading just the verse, you just can't know. I mean, you can't get or extract what the true meaning of it, the fullness of it. So that's exegesis, the way that basically this biblical interpretation.
Yes.
So so most especially when I have gone into the pastoral pastoral role sometimes, or going to preaching, I realized, I thought before, just listening sa aking papa kasi I'm a pastor's kid, no? It's like, this is just so easy, this is very easy. You just, go there and then talk about the Bible. And the Bible must always, the preaching must always be about God, Jesus, and love. It always surrounds that, and then finish with prayer. Now, now it's actually more than that, and it's actually a lot of dynamics going on,
Right.
preparing, and even believe me when I say 3 days of preparation.
Or more.
If you're 3 days of preparation, if you're actually faithful in doing your sermons, not just searching in the internet, is not enough. 3 days is not enough.
Yes.
So most of the time, Pastor Don or me, when I do it, we do it like a week before.
Yes.
Even before the week, we already start thinking about it. We just sit down a week before.
Yes.
And
That's
this one, like, it actually helps us for those who do not know what goes behind the scenes. It helps us to appreciate more the sermons that we see, that we oftentimes take for granted, just because we can always replay it in YouTube or whatsoever. But we now know that the preacher or the pastor would really dedicate a lot of time in preparing for such sermon. So,
Right.
Right.
Love,
That's nice.
love to our pastors or preachers.
All right. So,
Yeah.
Sir Don, Brother Don. Sir Don. I have a lot of other stuff to call. Pastor, Sir Don, Brother Don. Don na lang, Don.
Done. I'm good with that. Come on.
So I heard that we're talking about text, a specific text here. So what are
Yeah. We will be looking at this specific text that wherein we will use the model. Okay. But but before that, just want to for those who are just tuning in into this episode, to recap what we did, how we used the model last episode.
Oh
Okay.
yes, with
Yeah.
Kyle actually.
Yes.
I listened to that. That's
Yes.
nice.
Remember the passage, bro?
I actually don't remember the rest. But I listened to it. I
Yeah,
want to show
I
you
know.
my Spotify. I listened to it.
Oh,
I swear to God.
Yeah, I know.
I swear to God.
Yeah, so the passage was First Corinthians 8:1. This is very interesting, bro. I mean, I know you listen to it because this is one of the many texts in the Bible that is misunderstood. Not necessarily, not necessarily debated, but misunderstood. So this is how the passage goes. Yes, First Corinthians 8:1. It says, "Now concerning food offered to idols, we know that all of us possess knowledge. This knowledge puffs up, but love builds up." So, if you look at the passage in its face value, you could easily take the passage and understand it as if Paul is against knowledge because knowledge makes you arrogant.
Oh.
But yes,
I can see that.
yes. But if you look into the context, it is where things are changed. It is where you understand what Paul actually intends to communicate here. So, if you listen to the whole episode, you will get all the details there. But I just want to summarize it here as a recap. We realize that if we look at the context, just even the local context, the whole chapter, Paul is actually not talking about, or he is not really against knowledge.
Oh.
Because in the first place, the context is not about knowledge per se.
Mhm.
But the context is about specific knowledge of something. And that is knowledge of eating food offered to idols.
Oh.
Yes. So, because what was happening in the book of in Corinth during the time is that because some of them were pagan worshippers. They have their idols and they have their church, they have their temples. So some of them were confused and were still worshiping the idols, their idols, and they still offer offerings. And some of them eat from the meat that is offered. And for Paul, if you look at the whole chapter, he was saying it's okay. Because especially for you guys there in Corinth, who knows that it's okay. But for those people, or say new believers, or that are around you that do not know, or maybe for people who do not have that knowledge of yours that it's actually okay to eat, if that knowledge, and the act of eating will cause them to stumble, then better not eat.
Oh.
So the context there is that if you won't care for your brother who has no knowledge about it's actually okay to eat from the meat offered to the idols, if you don't care about them, then that's actually Paul describes it as a sin. It's an offense to Christ and to your brother.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes.
That makes sense.
So Paul is not against knowledge per se, but he is against arrogance from having knowledge of something and neglecting to care for your brother.
Oh.
Yes, because there are interpretations, you hear pastors say, be careful with studying too much
Yes,
because it makes you proud. And the passage that they quote is 1 Corinthians 8:1.
Yes. Yeah, I also have heard that, a pastor saying, the key to right living is not the right doctrine, but the right relationship with Jesus. I was like, oh no.
So the consequence there of that highly misunderstood verse is anti-intellectualism within our church communities, right? So when you say anti-intellectualism, it's like shaming if someone is really resolved in studying further.
Yes. So, you see, context really changes everything, right? So, for 1 Corinthians 8:1, that's what Paul was trying to communicate, because that was it is based from the context of what is happening in the church, in their community. So, it is not about knowledge per se, but it is, Paul was talking against arrogance from having knowledge that at the same time neglects the brother around who may stumble. And it's something that we really need to take seriously also, because according to Paul, it's actually a sin. It's an
It's a
offense to
sin,
Christ. And as for example, magkasama tayo, bro, and I ate it, and I ate that food, that meat, and you're a new convert, and you're confused about, because you were once a pagan, and you're still confused. Is it really okay to eat that food? Because if I eat that food, then that meat, it will be like I'm still offering or worshiping the God that I used to worship.
Yeah.
So especially if I don't know what's happening within your mind and heart, and then you partake of that,
Yes.
then you sin because you're thinking I'm still doing that's the thing I was doing before.
Yes.
And so for Paul, that is not very loving of you as a Christian. So what you need to do is you sacrifice. That's just probably an exaggerated word, but point there is that if it will lead your brother to stumble, to sin, then don't do it.
It really makes sense, because you mentioned about if you don't love your brother or sister, then it's really nonsense, right?
Yep.
And then you mentioned about sacrifice. When we go back to the definition of love, it's actually doing self-sacrificial things for the well-being of others.
Wow.
Pwede
May
na?
minahal ka na ba? Just kidding. Baka ma-out of context tayo dyan. Anyway.
Let's talk about our love life now.
It will become think with me. But see, we're just seeing how context really changes everything, right? It helps us to understand what the author is trying to communicate.
Yes.
So, for tonight,
Um,
this is very interesting because we will be looking at, I think it has been debated for so long. Like,
centuries?
like
And
people
not
say,
centuries, I think for quite few number of years. Yeah,
yes,
for sure.
like a lot of ink has been spilled for the sake of
for sure.
this
sure.
topic. And so let's give it a try tonight, right? Let's look into this passage and try to look at the context and see what the author is trying to
Yeah.
communicate from the text. Okay.
All right, so I'm ready to go into
You guys
this with
ready?
you guys. I haven't actually done this with real people. I haven't done exegesis with real people. I have done it with my professors. My professors are not a real people. It's not. I mean, for you, it's not a real people because we just did an online teaching. It's master's level. But
Yeah.
this is actually my first time doing a real Bible study with in real life, like
Yes.
really face to face. So I'm quite excited how to do this.
Yeah. So, by the way, guys, if you might ask why Zuriel is here, he's also. You need also to know. Hindi niya kasi sinabi kanina. He's taking his MA in what?
No.
What's it, bro?
Forget it. So I basically said na I haven't done this before, so that I could call on Don whenever I don't know how to answer the question or what's on there. So no,
Alright.
but I'm doing a master's in theology, but it's not that I'm not that good still. I'm
Alright.
very, and unlike Pastor Dan, who has been a pastor for a lot of years.
A lot of years. That was just 2 years in the ministry, bro. In the church.
But yeah, let's do this.
Anyway.
That's done.
Alright. Maganda talaga yung may babae, di ba? Paminsan.
Yeah, of course. Black and
They are-
white.
Yes. Anyway, so let's jump into the text. Okay. So, just like the last time, I always encourage our listeners, to have their own Bibles so that they can also look into themselves. Okay.
Yeah, and not just physical Bibles. You could use here this.
Yeah.
Bibles, everything. As long as it's not the Mormon Bible, as long as it's the real Bible. Yeah.
Okay, so the text is from 1 Corinthians 14:34 to 35. And before I read the passage, we have to, just like what I said a while ago, this is a very sensitive topic. And we're laughing, but it's I'm just trying to remind everyone that we will try to handle this as careful as we can, because we believe that there are brothers and sisters with different positions.
For sure.
Right? Yeah. So
Even us. The three of us. I don't know yet. We didn't rehearse this, or probably we might be arguing a few minutes from now.
just
So,
like,
but
just
just
like
know,
every Friday.
just know, guys, that I love you. What I might say bad things, but no, I'm just playing with you. It's gonna be a real fun time. Being with us talking about this stuff, even if it's considered taboo in a lot of Christian circles.
All right.
Okay, go.
All right. So there, let's ask our teacher here to read the passage for us. 1 Corinthians 14:34 to 35. One rest.
Women should remain silent in the churches. They are not allowed to speak, but must be in submission, as the law says. If they want to inquire about something, they should ask their own husbands at home. For it is disgraceful for a woman to speak in the church. Explain.
All right. Okay, so that is the passage, and the way again to understand this, is just to use our model. Alright?
Yeah.
So first, we will be looking at the historical context of First Corinthians. Right?
Historical
So
context. Okay.
if you have tuned in to our last our previous episode, because we looked into 1 Corinthians 8:1, verse 1, you have probably heard Kyle explain the historical context of Corinthians.
Yeah.
He even shared his personal notes on the outline of Paul's ministry to the Corinthians. And as much as I want to go deeper into that, but I just want to run through that. And if you can easily check the whole episode for you to know every detail that Kyle actually shared. But I'll just try to give you at least a glimpse of the whole timeline of Paul's ministry in relation to the Corinthians.
Oh no.
The Corinth church.
So
Okay?
Oh yeah.
Yes,
That's
yes.
nice.
So, in Acts 18, we read that Paul visited Corinth in AD 50 to 52. He did ministry there with Jewish Christians and unbelievers who became believers later on, and the Greek and the Romans. And in 1.5 year of ministry, he was able to build communities, church, and after that, he went on with his missionary journey. And when he was in Ephesus, yep, a report came into him about what was happening in the Church of Corinth.
Oh.
Yeah, the community of believers that he built together with others. And when he heard about that, he was so sad and I think very disappointed in terms of what actually was happening. So if you look at the book of, if you read the book, the whole book of the First Corinthians, you will see why I'm saying that. Because the church in sometime AD 55, that was during the spring when Paul wrote this letter to the Corinthians, the church in Corinth. The content of the letter of Paul was he was dealing with issues from the Corinthians, the Corinthian believers.
Oh, I see.
And he mainly dealt with at least 5 issues, right? If you remember, he dealt with issues on divisions.
Oh, all right. So there's factions.
Yes, because Paul went there, he taught, and Apollos and Peter, and people there were believers. There were like, hey, I'm a follower of Paul.
All right.
He's better than Peter. He's better than Apollos. So
no.
they were becoming like
No.
like groups
Yeah, like
for
subgroups.
their leaders. Yes.
Yeah.
So there were that divisions. Okay, so Paul had to deal with that, and after that, one of the things that he dealt with were issues on sex, because some believers say like, "Hey, we're already saved, we are free, therefore we can do whatever we want," and so they still go to their temple and have sex with prostitutes. And Paul has to call them out like, "Hey, you're already saved, you're a new creation, and your bodies are a temple of God." And after that, that's where just the text that we went through last episode, chapter 8, Paul talked about the issues on food offered to
The gods.
the gods, the idols. And after that, Paul, in our passage right now, Paul talked about order in worship, because a lot of them were came to a point of competing and bragging on their gifts, like speaking in tongues, prophesying, teaching, to the point that they lost order. And so Paul addressed that by saying, "Hey, you are a body of Christ, and each one of you has different gifts, and you are to play those roles in order for the purpose of the edification of the church, of your community." So later on, we will talk about that more. And then the next issue that he dealt with was the issue of resurrection, because there were some believers there who thought that the resurrection doesn't make sense, it cannot happen. And so Paul had to argue for the resurrection. And so that were the issues that Paul had to deal with. Okay? Because if you understand, Corinth was a place wherein it was like a center of commerce and business.
Yeah, it was multicultural.
Yes.
It was the center of the world at that time.
Yes. So there were a lot of people, a lot of ideas. And what happened was, those ideas, those issues, cultural, political, societal issues, dinala yun ng mga members, ng mga believers doon sa church. And Paul was so concerned because by the way, I want you to understand that when I say churches, during their time, of course, some of them still meet in the synagogues, but they also meet in house churches, wherein at least there are scholars say 50 people, and that's where they study the scripture. It's where they prophesy, they speak in tongues,
Ancient
they pray.
simbahay or simbalay.
Yeah, that's what we call it now. Yes. Maybe it looks different than how we do it now, but something like that. A fellowship of believers are done in houses or in homes. Okay? So, where am I? So yun yung nature ng fellowship nila. Whenever we think of Corinthians. So Paul is writing with that context where the believers meet. Yes. So medyo nawala ako ng train of thoughts ko. Saan ako dun?
You were already like talking about the problems the Church of Corinth are experiencing, the 5 problems.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So they were meeting in. We need to understand that they are meeting in their houses.
Mm-hmm.
At least there are at least 50 people within their meetings. We need also to understand that in their say meetings in their houses, there were also unbelievers. There were new
Ooh.
believers. That's why Paul was very concerned because be careful with how you behave because people might not believe the gospel. People might not believe what you're teaching because of how you're living your life. For example, Paul was probably thinking you are there and there's no order, you know, and so that's why Paul had to deal with all those issues because he cares not just the edification of the church, but he cares for the unbelievers or the
Yeah.
new believers that were there with them in their fellowships.
Yeah. So they lacked role modeling.
Yes, so Paul had to address that in his letter. And as much as I want to go through, the time hanggang sa Second Corinthians, but I'd like just to jump right away to, the time of Clement, a
Oh, yeah.
disciple of the disciples,
Church
wherein
father. Church
yes,
father.
yes, wherein he wrote to the believers in Corinthians about how they have gotten worse.
Oh.
Yes, that's why we understand Paul on why he dealt with this and why it has a second letter in which actually nasabi to ni Calvin, Paul had two visits in the middle, you know. And Paul even had a letter na wala na tayo ngayon na tinatawag nilang a letter of sorrow, a letter of tears
See.
because it was so severe that it is described to be that way because of what was happening in the Church of Corinth.
Mm.
And ito yung sabi ni, moving past, no? Diretso tayo sa time ni Clement nung nagsulat siya sa Corinth. Ito yung sabi ni Clement, no? On how they have gotten worse. Sabi ni Clement to the last part, sabi niya, and this rumor has reached not only us, but those who are unconnected with us. These are unbelievers. And this is what Clement said. So that through your infatuation, the name of the Lord is blasphemed, while danger is also brought upon yourselves. So, even with those letters, even with, according to Clement, he described it as Holy Spirit inspired epistles of Paul to them, they have gotten worse and it has even resulted for the name of the Lord to be blasphemed by the unbelievers. So, if you look at the church of Corinth, they are really in trouble because of how they are behaving, with the conflicting beliefs and their lifestyle. So, that is the historical context of First Corinthians. Those are the things that were happening during this time. And so now we will be moving on into the ultimate context.
Ultimate
Yes.
context.
Looking at
So what is ultimate context?
yes. So yes, looking at the book now, the historical context, we look into how the book of Corinthians, First Corinthians, lead to Jesus. Yes. What do you think? How do you think the book of Corinthians lead to Jesus? What do you think, guys?
Like
Looking at the
the
ultimate.
way that Paul suggested solutions for all the 5 problems stated in the Corinthians is through the gospel of Christ. It's
Yes.
through Christ that serves as the solution.
Hmm. How did Paul explain that in the book of Corinthians?
I didn't do my assignment, so you probably.
You take it
These
down.
guys did their assignment.
I'm
I
afraid
hadn't.
that I may have, I may wrongly word it.
How did Paul
So
explain? Yeah, I'm actually, genuinely concerned. I
Yeah.
mean, confused.
Yes. So you see, just looking back from First Corinthians 8, what was the solution of Paul? What was the solution of Paul to the conflict between eating meat from the meat offered to the idols?
oh, was that like you
What
have
was
to
his
bear in
suggestion?
mind to love your
Yes, love.
for the young believer or for the unbeliever?
Yes, exactly. So love was Paul's solution.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yes. So in looking at the book of Corinthians,
It's a lot of love. Yeah.
yes, that's why in the book of Corinthians, and if we know Paul like from the book of Romans, he is very serious about unity.
Mm. That makes
right?
sense.
Yeah, because God is a God of order.
Yes, and so what was the prayer of Jesus in the book of John, chapter 17?
Tell us, I don't memorize it.
You remember?
Pastor, I don't, Pastor,
The remember
Pastor.
the prayer of Jesus was the unity of the believers, the disciples. And later on he said in the same book, the world will know that they are my disciples by the love that they have for each other.
Mm.
So the book of Corinth leads us to Christ and how Paul desired for the unity of the body of Christ. Because because as a church, in Corinth, they were part of the whole body of Christ. And we see that the book values unity and love. And these are the things that Christ also value. And so that's how at least we can see the book of Corinth, understand it from in its ultimate in the ultimate context.
Wow.
Yes, right. So now let's go to the broad context, right? Um,
This is what I'm talking about. When we're doing stuff like this, I am in sponge mode. I want to listen. I don't want to talk.
He's just making excuses
you
so
know,
that he wouldn't talk.
yeah, I just don't want to talk because because I do that myself, and when I do that, I ain't doing that in just 5 minutes as the way he did.
no.
I will do that in an hour. Just actually, open up books, and then try to write down and listen to different podcasts. And this is just some sort of a different point of view research that we have done. Him, Kyle, and other admins have done for a lot of years, and now we have compiled it to this one. So let's continue, and I'd like to listen more.
So let's look at the
is.
okay. So let's look at the broad context wherein
Broad context, yeah.
wherein we ask the questions. What is the context of the book? The passage was written, or what is the language that was used, or what was the genre, or the nature of the book. So, as we look at the book of the First Corinthians, we know that it's the NT, and the language that was used when it was written is Greek, right? And we know, I mean, from the historical background that we have discussed, Paul was writing this as a response to what was happening in the Church of Corinth. Yes, so he's addressing issues, and to mention at the five, if you summarize the issues that Paul dealt was division, issues about sex, food, order and worship, resurrection, and also we see later on his final greetings. And it's a pastoral letter, it's a
Yeah.
letter of concern to what is happening, and a letter of challenge, of rebuke, of calling out like, hey, what is happening to you? You should be doing this, right? Explaining the way of Christ, as if Christ was their teacher, their pastor, how Christ would
Yeah.
want them to behave as a church. So that is the broad context. Okay, so now,
Yeah.
do you want to say something?
No. It's just I'm trying to understand the way we write letters today, and then the way they write letters before, right?
Exactly.
Today we write letters. Our context of letters is just a page, a two page. That's a letter. But it's not a letter. It's a book. But
Yes.
then again, they call it a letter because the way, even if you see the last part of this, send my regards to this person. It has the elements of a letter. That's why they
Yes.
call it a letter.
Yeah.
I was like, well, for
I think like the nearest modern or contemporary equivalent would be an essay.
uh, probably, yeah. But it's just it is really actually an essay sometimes just speaks on a like third person level. Again, this is actually saying, send my I would like to greet this person, this girl, this that. It's like, oh, it's like a shout out. Shout out to this girl, shout out to that girl. Yeah, but yeah, it's really nice. I'm contemplating on that. Wow, it's the way he must have written that letter, he must have been really inspired because it's a long letter. If I was that guy, I wouldn't have come up with that. But I don't want to prolong this one. Let's move to the local context, and this is where I like it.
Yeah, so before we jump into the local context, I want you to compare to our letters now, wherein we personally write them and then we mail it, right? Or maybe we send it, may electronic mail na rin tayo. But during their time, how a letter is written and sent is different. Say for example, I am Paul and I have a scribe. So my scribe will write it, and then my scribe can be the one also to bring the letter to the one I'm writing the letter to. And then as someone who wrote the letter with me, it's something like you bring the letter to, say I'm writing to Res, and then Res will receive it, and then Res will say, okay, read it for me. So the one who brought the letter will read it for Res. And if Res will have something she did not understand, Res will ask you as the scribe, and you will be the one to explain the letter to Res. That's how the letters, especially in the NT, if you want to understand it, that's how it goes.
Oh wow!
So as a sender, you have a responsibility to explain, to clarify what the sender
Yeah, the
meant.
sender or the messenger, it now has like a huge role
Yes.
when it comes to communication. Before, like when we read in the Bible, oh, he's a messenger, blah blah blah. But
Right.
now, like, it's like a duplicate, like the executive assistant, executive secretary of this person.
Yeah, something like that, because that's how their letters are sent. So now let's look into the local context. The local context is wherein we check or we read, say, the chapter, where the passage is located or the text is located. So now let's ask the rest to read the passage for us.
Oh,
Yes, again, teacher.
which one?
1 Corinthians chapter 14, you may start from verse 26 to the last verse. 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 26 to 40.
Okay, a little bit lengthy. Hang on.
Yep.
Good order in worship. What then shall we say, brothers and sisters? When you come together, each of you has a hymn or a word of instruction, a revelation, a tongue, or an interpretation. Everything must be done so that the church may be built up. If anyone speaks in a tongue, two or at the most three should speak one at a time, and someone must interpret. If there is no interpreter, the speaker should keep quiet in the church and speak to himself and to God. 2 or 3 prophets should speak, and the others should weigh carefully what is said. And if a revelation comes to someone who is sitting down, the first speaker should stop, for you can all prophesy in turn, so that everyone may be instructed and encouraged. The spirits of prophets are subject to the control of prophets, for God is not a God of disorder, but of peace, as in all the congregations of the Lord's people. Women should remain silent in churches. They are not allowed to speak, but must be in submission, as the law says. If they want to inquire about something, they should ask their husbands at home, for it is disgraceful for a woman to speak in the church. Or, did the word of God originate with you? Or are you the only people it has reached? If anyone thinks they are a prophet, or otherwise gifted by the Spirit, let them acknowledge that what I am writing to you is the Lord's command. But if anyone ignores this, they will themselves be ignored. Therefore, my brothers and sisters, be eager to prophesy, and do not forbid speaking in tongues, but everything should be done in a fitting and orderly way.
Oh no!
Yun. Now that we have read the local context of our text, right? Verse 34 and 35, because that's actually our text. After reading the local context, what do you think Paul is addressing in the passage, from our passage? Considering that we have read the local context, right? From verses 26 to 40. What do you think is the local context? What is being addressed here by Paul in this part of his his letter?
Yeah. Now that you read that letter, I mean those verses, y'all who are watching or listening right now have probably realized why we call it controversial. No, you probably know where we're going to. You know what I mean? Where this is leading to. So basically, the one of the most controversial part there, the verse there, is the silencing of the women.
Mm.
You know, the silencing of the women. Oh no! It's like, what does that mean? Is Paul being sexist?
Mm-hmm.
Is Paul sexist? That should be our thumbnail. Is Paul sexist? So yeah, is he some sort of a misogynist or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
So it's now, this is where these processes or these our approach would actually count. No,
Yes.
when we actually try to find out the historical context. Of course, we did that, and now we're in the local context. So what is because it's really odd for of course for a reader, for a person who already reads the Bible. It's really odd for Paul to contradict himself. Of course, we
Yeah.
talked about love, right? We talked
Yes.
about love a while ago. That it is actually the key, or some sort of the rule. I mean the solution to this division, to these problems, is actually love. No. Now, when we're talking about love, unity, why does it seem like we're trying to divide the people in the church now? There's a division between men and women. That there's a division between, a teacher and a not, just a listener, something like that. So it's very unlikely that Paul will contradict himself.
Yeah.
So there's got to be something more to what the plain verse or text is trying to say.
Right.
What they say, Pastor Don?
So, reading from the local context, we will realize that Paul is not actually being sexist, or those things that you said a while ago. Paul is not actually against women. Paul is not actually dividing the church. Instead, if you look at the context, Paul was actually dealing with, yes, addressing with the order of their worship in their fellowship. So if you read,
It's like, in simpler terms, it's the program flow, like that.
yeah, I'm trying to imagine how they meet. Sa atin kasi ngayon may program flow tayo, di ba? For some churches, when we enter the church, binibigyan tayo ng program flow. Sa kanila, parang wala pang printers noon. But it's really about how they do things. Kasi nga, when if you look at the text, may there are people who speak in tongues. And Paul is saying that's actually good. But if there will be no interpreter, then what is the use of that if people will not benefit from that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
Because
is
they can't
where-
understand.
Yes, that is where disorder happens. So when Paul mentioned verse 34 and 35, it was in the context of what does verse 40 say?
Verse 40.
Yes.
Verse 40 says, "But everything should be done in a fitting and orderly way."
Yes. So that now we understand that the local context, the context of of where Paul said verse 34 and 35 is not about sex, not about what they call this, the role of
Gender
women, the
roles.
gender roles. Yes, yes. But it's about worship.
I see.
Yes, and then now, because so now we see that's the local context. Now we just have to jump into the textual context in order for us to fully grasp now or see the full view of the text. Okay, so now let's look at the textual context. Now, if you look at the words here, of course, women. These are women. Wala nang ibang meaning dyan. If you look at that in Greek, that just mean, I don't really know how to read this. But just, it only means a woman, right? And then women. And then to be silent means just to keep silent. Hindi magsasalita. And then churches, it's just ecclesia. The people, the gathering, the fellowship. and not permitted to speak. It's just speaking, you know. So basically, parang we can take the words as they mean, but in terms of understanding what is the intended message of Paul here, then what we need is not really the translation in Greek as to textual studies, but just the context.
Wow.
So now, if I may ask you guys, looking at the passage now in verse 34 and verse 35, is Paul really prohibiting women to ministry?
Like, for me, the way I understood it is because he's just setting order.
Yes.
And if we try to imagine how chaotic it would be if there is no rule that says don't speak yet, let the other person, in this case let the man speak. This is just to have some order, or it's like you take turns, something like that.
Yes.
But your place to say something is at your home,
Yes.
something like that.
Because I like that you mentioned that rest, because during this time, the reason why the women were not permitted to speak was because there are actually a lot of I think Zoriel knows this. There are a lot of theories or interpretation as to why they were not permitted. Do you want to share first, bro?
Yeah. Probably. There's a lot of course. When you're a Southern
Scholars.
Baptist right now,
Oh, yeah.
you probably have looked into this, right? If you're you have heard about the Rick Warren issue in SBC America. They got kicked out of the SBC for ordination for women pastor ordination. So yeah, I tried to look onto this for the past few days. I haven't. This is not my field of research, but a lot. There's been quite a divide with the scholars, but of course there's a consensus. Not I actually couldn't call it consensus, but it's probably like 60-40, something like that. As a small fraction of the scholars would say that these these specific texts were just slipped in at the end of by the conservative writers, messengers or whatever. No, this was not part of the original text. That's what they're trying to say. But a lot of scholars disputed it, and it's not widely accepted by scholars. But now there's something that I quite lean towards on. Now we're going back to the historical context, to which time this is.
Right.
This time was what kind of society were they actually living in?
Yes.
If you didn't hear her, what'd you say?
Patriarchal society.
It is actually a patriarchal society, And what does a patriarchal society look like? For starters, education.
Yes.
Education is just most likely available
Yep.
for men and women of royal blood, of course. But for those who are, just
Ordinary.
poor or ordinary women, it's not available to them.
Right.
So this, to set order in the church, so that those who are actually learned will not be they will not be hindered by the questions, by the of course it will come to a point that it will be a ridiculous question since it's not available to them, they haven't learned about it, and they will ask this to people who are actually really advanced now. It's not that it's wrong, but this is just the only time that they could only do that. It's really they could have done that in their homes at the it's just like saying that you're in a say you're in a ETS EPS. ETS or EPS is the biggest, probably of the biggest fellowship of evangelical philosophers and theologians. You go there and you ask there, why did Jesus die? It's something like that, right? You go there and you ask that question. Do you think that would be, of course for now it's alright probably, but in a patriarchal society, do you think that would be accepted well in that, in that community, that this guy has taken probably a minute just to ask that question, something like that, So that's one of the one of their hypotheses, actually to answer this, that to keep order there, you have to ask those questions, because in your house to your husband, something
Right.
like that. So what is happening actually here is it's not prescriptive. Paul is not prescribing that this ought to be the way. He is not saying that this ought to be the way. What he's trying to say, this is the way of your society. This, unfortunately, in your society, it's not educated women. It's not that. It's not a thing. Basically, let's just make the most out of it. That let's try to make order in what's already there. He's describing basically what's the situation is. It's not prescribing that what ought to be the case.
Yeah, like try to imagine how can a discussion go through if the other parties aren't of the same educational level. How can they have the same language? So for example, I am not an academic philosopher, and if I go to that ETS, for sure I wouldn't be able to relate or even understand some of the specific terms that are
Concepts.
unique in that discipline. So something to that effect.
Yeah, I like. By the way, guys, when Zuriel said he did not study, or just he's
Nah,
lying. He just wanted me to do it in the first part. You mentioned about discussion,
Yeah.
because we need to understand that the believers in Corinth, the prophets, those that teach,
Mhm.
they are just learning. In a
Mm.
sense, as teachers, they were not like Paul or like the apostles that that they really had like teachers like Jesus, or like the rabbis, the well-known rabbis. So whenever they prophesy, whenever they teach, whenever they exhort, whenever they rebuke, or they comfort, whenever they talk about a passage, it has to be something like peer reviewed.
Mm.
So that's why you said a while ago that when for example, I mean, Paul mentioned it, right? When at least there should be 3 who will prophesy, and then there will be 3 who will validate that, who will
No.
discuss if that's actually true, if that is actually right, if that actually, if we can actually believe that, if that's really from the Lord. So looking at that context, during their time, because again you mentioned it, the women during their time don't really have the privilege like men in terms of education, especially in terms of, I mean, in terms of being mentored, in terms of being discipled, because during their time the teachers were men, and they most of them, they only choose men to be their mentee, or their trainee, or their disciples. Only the exemption is, we know Jesus had women like Mary. Remember, I think it's in Luke 10, wherein when they were in a house, Mary chose to sit. That language of sitting at the feet of a teacher actually means being a student of the teacher. That means Mary is actually a disciple. Later on, she would become really a minister, a leader. So, um, during their time, women don't really have that. Let's just like what said, that privilege of being taught or learned. Doesn't mean though that they don't ever hear the Torah, the teachings. No, they hear them, but it's just that men had more privilege than them. Sa kanila, parang, for example, kumbaga sa panahon natin ngayon, we can understand na hanggang 14 years old lang yung training nila. But for men, it's progressive, especially when they have teachers. So during that time, you were right. Kasi sa panahon noon, kung they were talking about this specific topic and you have less knowledge about the thing, and you asked a question that is really not probably very related to what is being discussed, during their time, that would be rude.
Oh.
Yes, that would not be very respectful to do.
Mm.
So maybe for some of you would say, so they don't support women to learn, or people just learn. No, that's not actually the point, because if you look at Paul, he then encouraged them, the women, to do the learning in the house. Yes, wherein he charged the men to to teach their wives. If the women should ask their husband or the men in their house, instead of asking the question there in the fellowship. So the way that, just like what you all have explained, two of you explained, the way to keep the order was to let those people know, handle the lecture, the discussion in the fellowship, because we know that, in verse in chapter 11 of First Corinthians, Paul actually encouraged women to keep praying, to speak in tongues, and to prophesy. That means that Paul, excuse me, is not really against women doing ministry, teaching, and even preaching,
Yeah.
exhorting, and bring a message of comfort. You see, or doing ministry in general, because he's encouraged that.
Yeah.
I mean, the Lord Jesus Christ. I mean, Paul. Yes, he discipled Mary, and he had a lot of followers. And
Yeah.
Paul, in the book of Romans, I think it's in chapter, I forgot. When he acknowledged or commended Priscilla,
Priscilla,
who brought
yeah.
the letter to the Christians in Rome,
Yeah.
and the rest of the like of the believers, like most of them were women who helped
Oh.
him in the ministry of in Corinth.
That are actually, documented as some of those are actually deacons of the church.
Yes,
Women deacons. Yeah.
Yes. So you see, this is where context really helps us, right? Because if you just read the text and then you don't consider context and you just read the text plainly as it is, that's where you will be led to believe that, no, women can do ministry. They ought to be just silent in the
Yeah.
in the church.
Yeah.
So, but I mean,
Yeah,
what do you
that's
think,
the
guys?
thing too. You take it from me,
Hmm.
my fellow complementarian. I'm just playing with you.
Okay.
I'm a Southern Baptist, of course. We practice. What we practice is we don't have female pastors. For the most part. But for me, as a soft complementarian,
What does that complementarian mean?
You know,
Can you explain that first?
It's
as
basic.
before you go on, yeah.
Complementarian mean there's actually two views to this,
Okay, like that.
But of course, within those two views, there's still versions of what the complementarian is, and
Yeah.
egalitarian is. Again, it's complementarian versus, not actually versus, but and egalitarian. No,
I like that.
complementarian would
Sorry.
say that there's female, there's male, and they have
Distinct rules.
they're actually equal. They would say they are equal. They are equal, but has different roles. There's something a female can do, and there's something a male can do. But then again, once they connive, that's something that makes them equal. They're equally different. That makes them actually, when they connive, equal, 100%. Now there's second is the egalitarian position, where people are actually saying that there's if you're actually a complementarian, we are complementarians too, given that we want that women can actually give a special, they have special talents, there are things that they can do
Gifts.
that men can do. Why don't you give them an opportunity to take the leadership of a man? That's what they say. If you say that they actually have special abilities, why can't they take the lead for men? If they have something that a man cannot offer. So that's what they're trying to say, that they have to have, equal opportunities, and whatever a man, or basically a position of a man could be the position of a female, But then again, we don't want this conversation or this whole podcast to be about that. It's actually not about it. It's just an implication of what we have read, right?
Right.
So even me as a complementarian, soft complementarian, let me get that clear.
Clarify.
I wouldn't go. I wouldn't quote this text to prove my position. Even some of the best complementarian scholars wouldn't say that this is a proof text for their position.
Bro, you mentioned proof text. What does that mean?
You're kind of putting me in a hot spot here.
No, but just for them to understand.
A
your
proof
language,
text is
yeah.
some sort of a biblical evidence, the text that we provide, the basis that we
supports.
provide that supports our claim, So when they say this proof text, for example, this, women cannot teach, given this
Yeah.
passage, First Corinthians, give that to them. Just this specific verse, and I was
Right.
no, First Corinthians 14, read that. No, because if you actually read the First Corinthians, all of it, that's not what it means. That's basically it. Even as somebody who wouldn't, say that egalitarian is the position, on who disagree with that position, I wouldn't say that this is a good proof text for our position. You know, because you have to take it as what it is. If we take this literally, then there's got to be no female Sunday school teachers. There's got to be no female professors, because a seminary or Bible school is still part of the church.
Right.
There's got to be no female on that. But I don't think most of the Baptist or mainline Christian denominations do that. No, so that's just my thing here. This is why we magnify the process of actually exegeting or trying to squeeze out what's the full meaning of the text.
Yes.
No, not just this specific group of verses, no, or phrases, but actually the full context of it.
Right.
From the onion that we showed you a while ago.
Right.
The what seemed to be a supporting position for one camp isn't actually a supporting position, that is actually looked down upon. You will be laughed at, not laughed at, but you will be pitied upon. Those who are actually have read on this topic, while you think that you're actually you're actually presenting a good case for your position. So let's try to so the case here, what I'm trying to say is, let's try to read the passage first before we read our camps into it, or our
Yeah.
presuppositions into it. Because if I would have talked from my presupposition, I would have said that's a clear, that's mati. What's that in that's checkmate, right? That's checkmate. If I would have read my position to that,
Literally.
but I've let the scriptures or the text fully express its message to me before I take it into my position.
Right.
No, so
That's why, of course, you correct me if I'm wrong, but it's very risky, or it's a wrong move to have worn your theological lens beforehand, because it would make you biased with the text that you're studying. So
Yes.
what I think, like, one of the greatest takeaways from our discussion tonight is that how crucial it is to really go to the nitty-gritty detail of what the text says, of what the biblical text says, because if we are just taking it lightly, it will really change the way that we believe. And our belief, we have to be really careful with our beliefs, because it also affects the way that we treat others.
Yep.
So that's how crucial it is.
Yeah. So, especially for those who are listening and who are really in love with Jesus and you really want to obey Him in the right way, whenever you look at the scripture, you don't you cannot have your own lens. You have to have the context as your lens in trying to understand what the text, is trying to communicate. Yeah. So that, just like what Zoriel said, the text can let itself speak, right? So you don't interpret it according to what you already believe, right? Your system. So that's it. So now the principle here, when we look at this passage, is that the concern is order, and we know why. And it's established that why Paul did not permit suggested the women to be silent, because some of them were not that learned in terms of scripture or trained. That's why they have to ask their husbands or the men in their house. So now, in application, what would be, maybe for you, maybe especially for Res, because you're a woman, especially for you, Res, what would be your encouragement to women who are thinking of doing ministry? Or maybe there are some women who thinks, can I actually do ministry? What's the limit? What can I do? What can I contribute? And maybe they have read the scripture and they took it like literally and said, oh, maybe I just sit down and listen because Paul said.
Yeah.
What would be your encouragement? What maybe you have words for the women who are listening.
Always believe that working within the church system is a calling. So I think like the crucial step there is to really study first the Bible so that you yourself um, is making a decision based on your own reflection and your introspection. It's not just because other people have passed this piece of knowledge onto you. So at least when you're making that decision, you're taking full ownership of it. And in throughout that process, you try to ask yourself, and through your prayer time, if you're gifted to serve in the church as a minister, perhaps if you are called to do that, and I think it's really important that you just align with a denomination that is open to that, because if you really push it with a certain denomination who doesn't believe
So,
in that way, it would really just cause a lot of chaos. And God is a God of order, so that's what I would suggest to them. But if you're the person who's like me, like I don't feel called actually to serve as a preacher or as a
but you're
minister.
but you're referring to specific calling in the ministry, right?
Yes, yes.
But in terms of just generally doing ministry in the church, in Christian community, yeah.
Well,
Can they actually do ministry?
of course, like
Yeah.
mine is, it's really important to self reflect, like why are you doing this in the first place. Like it's always a heart check at the very beginning, because sometimes we do things because it looks good publicly. We do things because it makes us feel good, and those are not the right reasons. So if we want to serve out of our response to God's love for us, by all means, go ahead. And, when we truly, authentically ask God for that opportunity, He would really present you with opportunities, with mentors, with resources, because you have given yourself to God so that He can use you as His instrument, as His ambassador. Because in the end, we are called to be little Christs, like, right? Little Christs. So for me, go. I mean, number one really is to have that real intention, pure intention in your heart. And of course, the rest will follow.
Yeah. Just before you pass on to Zoriel,
Yes.
I just want you to, maybe for some they don't know what you're doing. At least it's not to brag, right? But just maybe just to encourage women, like maybe you can do this. The
Yes,
kind of,
yes.
so you just share what you're doing in the ministry you're doing for the
Well,
church,
I
the whole
had
body of
some,
Christ.
let's just say I have some phases
Yeah.
in my life. So I had a phase in my life where I really served a church. So I served as one of the heads in leading young professionals. So I was also quite active in handling biblical studies for
Small
young
groups,
professionals, small
referring?
groups. Yeah, I did
Bible study.
those things. And then there's also a phase in my life where I, like, it's not really under the umbrella activity of the church, but I reach out to people who are not believers or have already fallen away from the church, and I really establish relationship with them. And hopefully, we get to a level where I can open up and introduce God to them in a new lens, because if there's pain, trauma, it
Right.
really changes the perspective of a person.
Yeah.
So that kind of ministry, see, that's another pathway.
Yes.
And then another phase in my life where I'm quite vocal
Yeah.
in social media about this. So that's what I do. Like, with whatever resources and opportunities that God has given you, you try to ask God, like, how can I make all of this be useful, and that it's you who can be seen in what I do.
Right.
Yeah.
You have not mentioned what you do for CTT, bro.
What do I?
And maybe it's a
okay.
time for you to probably invite whatever you
Ah,
want to
okay,
say.
okay, okay. It's for the okay, okay. So I actually handle the women's group
Yeah.
in the Christian think tank. Why don't you just tell me that? Okay, yeah, I do handle the women's group. So if you're interested to
Mm.
undergo some book reading and to just be part of a group of ladies who are into philosophy, into theology, you have these questions about God and evil, and you're just really looking for the right place or the right people to talk with, because not everyone is open and comfortable with talking about these things. So I invite you, ladies, and
Right.
all you need to do is just to be part of our CTT FB group,
Discussion
and
hub.
you can reach out to me as well.
Yeah. So, yeah, the rest already shared it. We prayed for a woman to be part of the admin so that there can be someone who can also
Yeah.
like lead, handle or disciple or mentor our ladies who are actually from in the CTT community that wants to learn. And so we're just blessed to have been given rest
Yeah, for
in
sure.
the ministry of CTT. She's
Yeah.
like an answered prayer to the group. Like, bro, that was during the pandemic, right? And
Yeah,
then
and it's not that just we chose her mainly because she's female, right? But of course, that's a strawberry on top that we have a female admin. But because actually there's no other member there that was like doing the things that she does. No,
yeah.
even the men there, yeah, right? She was like almost everything that our activities on online. She would share that to everybody. She was always commenting. She would,
Yeah.
she was doing she was doing
And it was
all this
start,
stuff,
yes.
right? That's why and my point here is actually in women in the ministry. This is how I view it. Of course,
All right.
as a Southern Baptist, I would I would say that there will be things that we would disagree on. From Kamkop, he's from Kamkop. He's a professor in Kamkop seminary, and then he's from a non-denominational church, and we might have different positions in this one. But we have to make this clear from the get-go here that we're not trying to make this. Of course, the debate between those two camps that I mentioned a while ago is actually way deeper than this. This is just not this is merely just us demonstrating to you how to read the Bible, right?
Right.
But you know, we have to actually admit to people that both camps, even if we disagree, we can sit down still and not smack each other. you know, we can still sit down over a coffee, and we can. And I have to really admit that both camps can make positive cases for their camps without. I mean, within the bounds of orthodoxy still. They can still faithfully read the scriptures, the Bible, and come up with their own, the propositions that affirms their beliefs, right? That's I'm telling this to people who are actually quick to say that just because a person disagrees with you, that he's not then or he or she is not actually considering the Bible as inspired, as inerrant. This is an issue of inerrancy. Now you believe in women pastors, you're not treating the Bible as authoritative. No, you can be you can treat the Bible as authoritative and at the same time believe in women pastors, even if I disagree with you. That's what I'm trying to say here. So, in this position, the first person who have actually that was 4 or 5 years ago who have rebuked me on this is my female teacher in college. That's like probably women pastors are being raised or women ministers are being raised because men. I don't want to cuss. I'm sorry, but men are too no, yeah, or
They don't step up.
men are too scared to do things that a woman wanted to do, and I think I see that in the church. Here in my seminary, most of my excellent students are women. Do you relate? Most of my students who are eloquent in preaching are women. Most of my students who wants to evangelize in the streets are women. And who am I to even if I believe in that that the ultimate position or leadership position in the church should be male, but who am I to stop the working of God through that woman, that He wants to do those things, right? So these are the things that actually are bound for another podcast, right? There's a lot of
Right.
there's a lot of things that we want to tackle about, but you
Yeah,
know,
we really need to put on the brakes because I just know that we won't end. We won't.
Yeah. So, yeah, actually, it's true. If you look at debates on this topic, it would go to like how many episodes, but we're just for that's why Israel was always saying this is not for the sake of really making a position, but this is really just interpreting the word and what it tries to communicate. So just in closing, if you look at the Bible, there were actually a lot of women who did ministry, whom God used in the ministry. And just want to make a correction to myself. A while ago, I said Priscilla. Did I said Priscilla, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Priscilla brought the letter from Paul to Rome. It's actually Phoebe. I get the names.
Yeah,
interchanged.
because a lot of them have been written in the last part, kasi so that easily gets mixed up. Yeah.
It's in Romans chapter 16 wherein Paul appreciate Phoebe, and at the same time I actually appreciate Priscilla because they were together, they ministry together with Priscilla's husband in Corinth. And so you see there, and just like I said a while ago, Paul actually mentioned a lot of women there, which he commended doing ministry, mentioning some sacrifices that they did for the ministry. So in closing, you heard the encouragement of Res. Women, you have your gifts, you have things that God has gifted you with. The purpose of that is for the edification of the church. So I hope that you use that there. If you see the encouragement of Paul in the last verses of chapter 14, this is what he said: "Therefore, my brethren, desire earnestly to prophesy and do not forbid to speak in tongues." He did not say, so men, continue to, he did not, he said brothers in plural form, and that would mean women and men. That's like, let's say in Tagalog, mga kapatid, continue to pursue prophesying and do not forbid speaking in tongues. So he's encouraging everyone to keep prophesying, not just the men, but he's actually encouraging everyone. So if you look at the context and now as an application, I would say, like Paul, I would encourage everyone, men and women, if you have the gifts, if you have things that you can offer to God, then just serve God. Right? You just let God use you in the ministry. And so that's how we close this. I hope that you continue to tune in to our podcast. We have Think Together, Think With Me, and Think About It with Dan. And we released our episodes every Sunday. And I hope that you continue to tune in. And thank you so much, bro.
Yeah, bro.
You're coming back again, and of course, Res, for the next episodes. Think With Me.
It's been fun. It's really been fun.
Yeah.
We haven't done this for a very long time, right?
Yes. Just, because this is recorded last night, we had a very long conversation discussing about passages and concepts and topics and things that current things that are actually happening, right? And just like the feeling of it's for me, it's just, I know you guys can also relate. When you study a text and you get what the author is intending to communicate, it brings joy, right? It's just the fruit, I think, of studying, of doing the job. So that's it. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you very much.
And this is the way we end, right? Even in our post, what do we say?
Keep thinking. If you actually stayed until this time, send us a message. We might have something for you.